Welcome to Bang for the Buck, the series where we usually look at guitar gear from different companies that used to be expensive and today can be found for surprisingly little money. This is already episode number 10 of Bang for the Buck. And after one of the first Bang for the Buck episodes, Carsten Stepanovic ended up buying himself a TC Electronics G Major after I kept talking about how ridiculously underrated these things are today.
I had maybe a couple of beer.
He later made an entire video about it without giving me any credit or whatsoever, which honestly is kind of a scandal and probably might lead into some legal action. So Carsten, prepare to get fendered. So long story short, today's anniversary episode is all about TC Electronics. And depending on when you start playing guitar, TC Electronics can mean completely different things. Some people know them from affordable pedals like the Hall of Fame, the Flashback, or the Polytune. Others remember giant rack units, studio processors, and insanely expensive professional gear that used to sit in studios and touring rigs all over the world. Which raises a really interesting question. How well did TC Electronic gears actually age? So today we're taking a journey through the history of TC Electronics. Let's get into it. Throughout the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, TC built a reputation for studio quality effects and high-end processors. Probably the most legendary example of that is the TC 2290 dynamic delay. And honestly, calling it just a delay almost feels like calling the Batmobile just a car, or Hogwarts just a school, or the One Ring just jewelry. This thing became so famous for its incredible clean repeats and deep control options and MIDI integration and overall sound quality. Even today, decades later, many players still consider it one of the greatest delay units ever built. Then came units like the G4s, which basically became the dream rack processor for countless guitar players in the late 90s and the early 2000s. At the same time, TC also moved deeper into studio and production gear. The Finalizer, for example, became incredibly popular. And then there were also units like the M1 or the G Major products that are especially interesting for this episode because they started bringing a lot of that high-end TC sound into a much more affordable range. The G Major in particular became insanely popular among rock and metal players in the early 2000s. That's where things become really interesting from a bang for the buck perspective. A lot of these devices used to be considered serious luxury, but today many of them can be found for surprisingly little money on the used market, despite still sounding genuinely good. As guitar rigs became smaller and more practical, TC also started moving away from giant studio racks and further into large multi-effects systems. One of the best examples of that time is the Nova system, which basically felt like a more portable and simplified version of the entire TC philosophy. You still got high quality TC delays, reverbs, modulation effects, but now in a format musicians could actually throw into a backpack instead of carrying around an entire rack case. And that's why it's peak bang for the buck material to me. Built like a tank, still sounding great, and somehow almost forgotten by a huge part of the guitar community. And then it happened. The G system. Probably one of the most ambitious guitar products TC Electronics ever released. This thing wasn't just a multi-effects unit. It was basically designed to become the command center of an entire professional guitar rig. Massive routing capabilities, MIDI switching, integrated loops for external pedals, and studio-grade effects made it feel less like a pedal board and more like a spaceship for guitar players. And these things were built ridiculously solid. There was literally a video at one point where a tank drove over the G system and the thing still worked afterwards.
So we figured it's time to get serious about driving over it with this.
What many players still love about it today are the delays, the compressors, and the modulation effects, especially the famous 2290 inspired delay sounds. Lift that thing to the prime TC era. There were also a few honorable mentions during this period that are absolutely worth mentioning. Units like the D2 delay processor, the Nova drive, the Nova repeater, even smaller studio units like the M300 or the M350 all carry parts of the same TC philosophy, bringing studio-inspired sound quality into gear that slowly became more and more affordable and accessible for normal musicians. Eventually then, TC moved even further away from giant rack units and multi-effects units and fully entered the pedalboard era. They were building compact pedals that ended up on thousands and thousands of pedalboards all over the world. And probably the most important example of that is the Polytune.
This is by far the most accurate guitar tuner on the market.
At first glance, it's just a tuner, but Polytune completely changed what guitar players expected from a pedal tuner with a, to that point, completely new polyphonic tuning. Suddenly, you were able to strum all strings at once and instantly see which strings were out of tune. The success of this pedal is pretty undeniable when you realize you still see it on what feels like every second pedal board out there. And if the pedal version wasn't convenient enough already, TC later brought the same concept into the clip-on tuner as well. I still use my Polytune clip today, and it's literally one of the most used pieces of gear in my everyday playing. Another massive success was the Spark Boost. This thing became a little bit of a secret weapon for many guitar players. It was incredibly useful, clean boost, EQ shaping. It became one of those pedals people bought for a very specific purpose, and that was to never put it off. So in a nutshell, you could say TC simplified their success all the way to the top. But still, that wasn't enough. So they thought, how can we become more versatile while still keeping that simple and user-friendly concept? And that's how the whole tone print idea was born. This era almost feels like the final great innovation in the chapter of TC Electronics. The last big moment where the company truly pushed fresh and forward-thinking idea into the guitar world. The last bang bang, I would say. Pedals like the flashback delay or the Corona chorus allowed players to load artist presets directly into the pedal using a smartphone by beaming it into the pedal. That's still one of the nerdiest and coolest things TC ever came up with. Especially the flashback series became incredibly successful because it combined great sounding delays with absurd flexibility. You could go from clean digital delays to tape echoes, ambient textures, or full 2290 inspired sounds in a tiny pedal form. There were also a bunch of honorable mentions during this period that deserved credit. Flashback X4 became a favorite for players who wanted more live control and looping functionality. The Hall of Fame Reverb became one of the most common reverb pedals on the planet, while pedals like the Ditto Looper or the Alter Ego or the Dreamscape or the Shaker Vibrato all carried parts of the same TC philosophy. Professional level sounds, clever ideas, and surprisingly affordable prices. That's probably the biggest reason why TC Electronics is such a fascinating company. They somehow managed to carry parts of their old high-end studio DNA all the way from gigantic studio rack systems into a tiny pedal for normal musicians like you and I. So when you look at the history of TC Electronics, you can almost follow the evolution of modern guitar gear through the company itself. It started with massive high-end studio racks like the 2290 or the G4's, gear that was designed for professional touring rigs, studios, and built TC's reputation for premium sound and quality and innovation. Then came the era of large multi-effects units, systems like the G Major, the G System, the Nova System, where TC slowly started bringing that professional studio DNA into products that became more accessible and more practical for everyday musicians. And finally, the pedal era, Polytune, Flashback, Hall of Fame, Corona, Spark Booster, and the entire Tone Prince ecosystem brought a lot of those same ideas into compact and affordable pedals that suddenly appeared on every pedal board all over the world. After going through all of this, there's only one thing I genuinely don't fully understand. How does a company with this many good ideas, this much forward thinking, this much creative engineering, and pretty bold marketing somehow disappear from the center of the guitar conversation? Sure, the industry changed, guitar gear changed, technology changed, but what TC Electronics left behind as a legacy is honestly fascinating to me. Some of these products shaped entire eras of guitar rigs and studio production, and even crazier, a lot of them are still incredibly usable today while costing a fraction of what they originally did, which is exactly why I personally want to make this episode. Because sometimes all the gear disappears from the public eye, not because it became bad, but simply because people stop talking about it. So now I'm curious, are there any other forgotten TC products I completely missed out? Did you ever own any TC Electronics gear? Or maybe there's a piece of gear you still use today that you'll probably never get rid of? Let me know down below, and as always, I'll catch you in the next hangout.